Hey guys, I would like to welcome Derek Tellier to the show. Derek is retired from his corporate job off of short-term rental investing, and he is here to tell us his story today. Derek, how are you?
I am wonderful, Avery. Thank you so much for having me on. I'm excited to be here.
Very excited to have you. So first off, can you tell us just a little bit about yourself, what your work history has been before you got into real estate investing, and how many doors you have, how you've gotten there? Just a little backstory about yourself and your portfolio.
Sure. So, to start kind of towards the beginning, I spent over 20 years working in I don't like to use the word corporate because I was kind of in the middle of things, but I worked in the Harley Davidson industry. I started out as a technician working on motorcycles and worked my way up into management, and then eventually got to a position where I was actually a service director over 4 service departments for a small group of dealerships. But it was a job, it was W-2, and I was just in that mindset of, you go to school, you get a job, you build your way up, and you make, some decent money, and then you retire when you're 65. And it was probably around 2016 that I kind of took a whole life shift. And it started with my health, started with my diet, and then exercise, and really helped me clear my mind. And then got introduced to real estate, got introduced to bigger pockets and all the usual things, rich dad, poor dad, and just kind of was like, wow, what have I been doing? Still had a real hard time wrapping my head around it, though. It was so different from anything else I had ever been taught. They don't teach you this in school and coming up. And I had both parents that worked and retired when they were 65 and all that. So it was hard for me to wrap my head around. So I finally broke through, and I started with refinancing my primary home, and found a good friend of mine, told him I was getting into real estate. And one of the first things he said to me was, well, if you ever, get a deal or something, I've always liked real estate. I like to, partner up with you and, maybe bring some cash, because I didn't have any cash. So my first deal was off of the MLS, and it was a full-on BRRRR deal, buy, rehab, refinance, rent, and repeat type deal. It went really, really well. Bought it significantly below market value, completely rehabbed it, went way over budget. My private lender funded the entire purchase, as well as the most of the rehab cost. The refinance that I had done gave me the cushion because I went way over budget on it, but it worked out perfect. And that was my first stop, and got that one done. That was 2019. So since then, that was June of 2019, I bought that one. So in the last year and a half, I've gone from 1 primary residence and 1 investment property to my portfolio now consists of 7 total properties. They're really essentially all investments because I'm house hacking one of them. 4 of them are short-term rentals, 3 of them are long-term rentals. And it came fast, and it came really through an absolute just mindset shift in what I could see was actually possible versus where I thought I actually could be.
Awesome. So you started out with a long-term rental. What gave you the idea, or what made you decide to buy short-term rentals?
Well, everybody around me, part of it was it was something I wasn't, you listen to lots of podcasts, and none of the podcasts were talking about short-term rentals, but I knew people that were in the short-term rental business, and they kept trying to tell me to get into it. But it was so different than anything I had listened to or read that it was still hard for me to wrap my head around. Once I really started putting pen to paper and looking at the numbers, it was just like, wow, this makes a whole lot more sense. The cash flow on these things is incredible. It's like, you get into that limited mindset. It's like, well, if this is so good, why isn't everybody doing it? So you start thinking, well, there must be something wrong with it. But you finally realize that there's not anything wrong with it. People aren't doing it because they have that fear, because they think that it can't be real. And it turns out that it is. So once I wrapped my head around it and tried to do it, it was full on. And actually, that very first long-term rental I bought, I considered making that a short-term rental, but it was in a community in a city where short-term rentals actually weren't allowed. So I couldn't do it as a short-term rental.
Oh, interesting. I didn't know that about that long-term rental. So are you planning to buy any more long-term rentals in the future, or are you just strictly short-term now?
Short-term, I'm looking at short-term rentals right now. I want to expand the short-term rental portfolio. I do plan to to pick up probably some more long-term rentals along the way. I think I'm going to get away from the single family stuff though. I mean, my long-term rentals are pretty easy. They really are. And they spit out decent cash flow. But I definitely want to build myself to get more passive. And if I start putting a property manager on those long-term rentals, a couple $100 a month cash flow just isn't very appealing to me. So I'll probably hang on to a couple of long-term rentals as long as it makes sense. But I plan to diversify into something more passive, put some money into some syndications and some other things that don't require me to do anything. Long-terms and short-terms are not labor intensive at all, but they are situations where I do need to answer my phone. I do need to respond to my emails, and I want to build myself to a point where I'm not even having to do that. So.
Gotcha. I always say that short-term rentals are work, but it's easy work. So it's not a situation where you're just setting it and forgetting it and you're not going to have to do anything. You do have to pay attention to things. It is going to interrupt your dinner at some point, but not all that often. And it's definitely worth the work. Which brings me to a limiting belief that a lot of people have about short-term rentals or about real estate investing in general, but specifically short terms. They are too afraid to get into it and especially to self-manage, because they're worried that they're going to get all kinds of calls in the middle of the night. Has that been your experience?
No, not at all. I have mine set up. I followed processes that you guys have always talked about, and I am a short-term shop client. Believe me, I am, and an evangelist for it, because I followed, the advice that you guys give, and that I don't give out my cell phone number. I mean, I guess they can get it through Airbnb. I think I've only had 2 or 3 guests ever actually call my number, and I don't answer. I tell them in my listing that I'm available through the app. They can send me a message. And, if it's that important, call 911. And my experience has been that it's been incredibly easy. I do not spend much time at all having to deal with it. Yet I get tons of great feedback from my guests about how responsive I am. And that's because I have good systems in place. They get messages from me that aren't actually coming from me. They're from automated software. So they feel like I'm checking in on them all the time. And when they do send a message, I take the time to reply, whether that's pre-booking, whether that's during their booking, even if it's just to say, hey, we're having a great time. Thank you so much. I'll take 30 seconds and type a quick message back saying, glad you're having a good time. Let me know if you need anything. And just doing those little things keeps them happy, and they leave you a great review. And it's insanely easy. I mean, it's ridiculously easy.
It definitely is. And I want to zoom in on one thing that you said about them not having your phone number. So a lot of investors, or I would call them vacation home owners and not true investors, people that are really about, I want my place to be the best experience because this is my personal vacation home and I treat it with, so much pride. And rather than looking at it as a true investment, those people would say, you want to get on the phone with your guests all the time and you want to be on top of them with, questions and asking how they are and stuff. But in my experience, you don't want them to have your phone number, because if they're calling you, then it's because there's something wrong. And if there's something wrong, it probably needs to be documented on the app. And it's not documented not documentable when they call you on the phone, and then Airbnb and Vrbo can't see what happened, and then they're probably going to rule in favor of the guest if something did go wrong.
Absolutely. Agree 100%. That's one of the main reasons that I do that is I want documentation. I want it written down. I want to be able to go back and review it. And yeah, phone calls are useless for that. You can't record the phone call. It's not out there for anybody to just go back and review later. So getting everything written down on text, on email, preferably. It's just as simple as, this is a business for me. And I've been working in the Harley industry. I was in customer service, and yes, customer service is important, but you can control that aspect of it and still have very happy guests, very happy clients, very happy, whatever you want to refer to the person as. You don't need to be buddies with them. And I know people like that. They give out their phone numbers. They react back and forth. I don't see them doing anything significantly higher revenue wise than I'm doing when I never talk to my guests. It's in today's world, people would rather exchange messages that way. It's just, that's how people communicate anymore, for good or bad, however you want to take it. But in this environment, there's no reason to get on the phone. You're not trying to get these people in a long term. They're at your place for a few days. you don't need to build a relationship with them. Now, if you're trying to buy their cabin, build a relationship with them, get on the phone with them. That's a whole different story that we can get into. But if they're guests, they're gone in a couple of days. Will they come back and stay again? Probably. But that's great if they do, but that's not that important to me. I don't need to have a relationship with these people.
And I think that's another thing that new investors get too caught up in with short-term and vacation rentals, is that they feel like they have to build this huge repeat business base. But if you buy in the right market, you don't actually need repeat guests. I mean, it's nice if they come back. Of course, you want them to have a good time, but you don't have to rely on it. So what in your mind constitutes a good vacation rental market to get into? Like what would be that criteria for you personally?
Well, first and foremost, it's got to be a market that supports it. Most of my properties, or all of my properties, my short-term rentals, are in Sevier County, Tennessee. And the reason is it's been the #1 market for a long time. It was under the radar for a long time. And that's because they've been doing overnight rentals in this market for 50 years. This is not a new concept. Now, Airbnb, Vrbo, that kind of stuff is a newer overall technology that's brought it into play, but they've been renting cabins out in this market forever. It's a high, very easy get the destination market. That's one big thing. So there's tons of people that come here. There's over 12 million people a year that visit the Great Smoky Mountain National Park. The infrastructure is there. There's handymen, there's cleaners, there's lots of ability to run a very successful business. So what I'm looking for in a market, I'm looking for a place that people want to go to. I'm looking for a place that there's very little or no concern about them putting regulations in to, limit or outlaw short-term rentals. It's got to be a place where the infrastructure is in place. If I'm not local, I need to make sure that I've got cleaners that I can call on. And if the market's established and you have those people locally that you can go to, and not just one or two, there have to be dozens of them, lots of people, because if one falls out on you, you got to have somebody else you can reach out to, handymen, contractors. It's got to be a market that's set up for it. Otherwise, the concept of a short-term rental sounds great anywhere and everywhere. But if you go in with that plan and the market is just not going to sustain it, they're going to put regulations in place. You see this a lot in bigger cities, suburbs where residents just don't want transient people in and out. Go into a market where they want you there. And that's probably the most important thing.
I 100% agree with that. I think we have the same strategy in terms of what markets make sense. I just don't want to bother with having to deal with regulations and city council meetings and things like that. I actually was talking to a guy the other day and I said the same thing. Like, I don't want to bother with metro markets because it's just not worth it to me to deal with all of the potential backlash and my investment no longer being able to be utilized for the reason that I bought it. And he said, oh, well, I have a bunch of short-term rentals in Cleveland. I make over $1 million a year on them. And all I had to do was show up to 17 city council meetings and I got the regulations that I didn't want thrown out. You just proved my point.
Yeah, that's a whole lot of work. I mean, I guess it depends on your mindset and where you're at and what you're trying to do with it. I mean, if you want to be super active and you want to go out there and change the world and all that, then by all means go for it. And if you've got the capital to do it and the time to put into it, by all means. I'm not telling anybody, to step back. But I think for the average investor, they're not going to do any of that. So for the average person that's just looking for some cash flow and looking for a fairly passive investment, then go to a market where it's tried and true and proven. And if you want to be, the guy that's setting the world on fire and changing everything that's going on, then by all means go out there and do that. Don't let anybody tell you that you can't, but just go in knowing what you're getting into. And I think the majority of people they do not want to put that much work in.
I know I certainly don't.
I don't either. I mean, that's not my goal. I'm trying to create passive income. I'm not trying to set the world on fire. I just want to live comfortably and try to do some good along the way.
I agree. So let's back up a little bit. And so you have 7 or 8 deals now. How have you been financing these? Have you just been doing traditional, conventional investment loans, or what does your financing look like for these?
Most of my stuff has been somewhat traditional financing. That very first deal I did, I used a private money lender. So I bought the property cash, just not my cash. I used, creative financing basically. So he actually funded it. He took, he had the deed in his name, or he I had the deed in my name. He had a promissory note on it. He had a mortgage on it, basically, that I had to pay him back. And I refinanced it after 6 months and paid him back. And that was eventually, I was just traditional loan in my name, investment property loan, but a refinance. One of the properties I own was my former primary residence. So I refinanced that when I was still living there. So that's set up as just a conventional loan. My first short-term rental I bought, which was in May of last year, 2020, I did that conventional financing as a vacation home loan. And my third long-term rental was when I converted my primary residence into a long-term rental. I went and bought another primary residence. So I bought that with a conventional loan, owner occupied, low interest rate. I lived there for a year, and then I moved out and turned it into a long-term rental. And the property I moved into was a duplex that I bought as owner occupied, conventional loan, and completely remodeled the lower unit. It is in Pigeon Forge, Tennessee, so it's right in the middle of that Sevier County market. Completely remodeled the lower unit, and I'm using it as an Airbnb now, and I'm living in the 800 square foot apartment upstairs. So I'm house hacking an Airbnb, basically. And then the second cabin I bought, I ended up going commercial financing on that. And the only reason I did, I was planning to go conventional financing, just as an investment loan with 15% down. But I tend to get kind of creative on my deals, and I am an agent, so I can use my commission. And anyway, I structured this deal where it was a true win-win-win for everybody involved. I was getting the seller the price they wanted. I was getting credits back to make my down payment low. I had this all set up perfect. It was a fantastic deal. And then I went to my lender, and they reminded me that as an investment property, the maximum the seller can, put in as a concession to the loan is 2% of the purchase. Well, I had structured my deal where the seller was providing about 4.5%. So that kind of screwed me. And I went, well, I guess I can't do conventional financing. So I went to a local bank that I know. Again, this was a relationship I already had with this lender. So that was helpful to have. So build relationships early on, because you don't know when you're going to need them. So I went to this bank and I said, here's my structure, here's my deal. So I financed that with a conventional loan. A quick rundown of the numbers on that. I bought the property for $345,000 with 20% down, but I only actually had to bring about $50,000 to closing. So that's creative math. If we don't have to get too deep into that, but that's how I got very creative on that one. And that was conventional. And then this last property I just bought, I got even more creative, I guess. I actually quit my W-2 job last year to go full-time into real estate. So I'm no longer eligible for a little while on getting conventional loans. But my parents do not live locally, and they were qualified to buy loans. So technically, the property that I'm sitting in right now, which is my latest short-term rental, is technically my parents' property. They bought it with a 10% down loan, but I control it. It's basically, I paid for it. I'm using it, but it's actually their vacation home. So get creative, find ways to make it happen.
There is a lot of creativity going on there. So that's a really good example of not letting your W-2 position or your debt to income ratio get in the way of growing a portfolio.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, just find a way. I always say, we can go back to Yoda. There is no try, right? It's either do or do not. There's ways to find it. You just got to sit back and try to start asking how, and get the I can't attitude out of your head and say, well, I can't do that because I just quit my job. Well, it's like, well, okay, how can I do that since I just quit my job? I mean, this cabin that I'm sitting in, I wasn't supposed to be buying. This was a relationship. I started working on this seller back in August of 2020, and it's February, and I just closed on it the first of this month. And that was just building a relationship for a long time. And when he called me up and told me he was ready to sell, the first thing I said to him was, okay, I still want it, but I just quit my job. So I need a couple of days to figure out how I can do it. And then I just started digging in and found a way to do it.
Just keep on keeping on. So
yeah.
we're gonna switch gears a little bit. So you are a full-time agent now in a short-term rental market. a very successful one, by the way. You did over 50 deals last year, which is a lot more. I think the average agent does 10 deals a year. So you're crushing it. How has that shaped you and made you a better investor? Because you're helping other investors all day, every day buy short-term rental properties. How's that helped your investing?
Well, yeah, it brought a whole bigger, broader spectrum because I get to see so many people doing things so many different ways now. Obviously, I'm helping them and showing them, so they're doing a lot of the same things I'm doing. But it's really helped me to get. I got a much better grasp on the market overall. Well, the reality is one of the biggest things I've realized is in the right market, you really don't have to be too picky about the property. I mean, 90% of how well it's going to do is going to be based on how you structure your management and how you handle the actual property itself. The building is just a building. It's got to look decent, but I mean, heck, I took a vinyl sided duplex, and yes, I spent some money on it, but it's not your traditional short-term rental in this market at all. And I'm still doing very well on it. And that comes down to management. The first cabin I bought, the previous owner had it with a local management company, and the best year they ever had, and he had it with them for like, I think it was 13 years. The best year they ever had, they did $26,000 in revenue out of it. I closed on that property in May. My first guest checked in Memorial Day weekend, May of 2020. Between May of 2020 and we'll say today, I've done right at about $45,000 in revenue out of that exact same property that they had, that they couldn't do more than 26 in. And I'm on pace to more than double that in my first 12 months. It's the same property. I didn't do much different. I spent a few $1,000s on that property. So what I'm seeing and what I'm realizing working with all these other clients is that it's all mindset, and it's all you. I can take the exact same property and put the right person in it, and they can crush what somebody else is doing.
Along those same lines, so working as an agent in a vacation rental market, you see a lot of properties when they hit the market that have rental history listed right on the listing. Typically, they're properties that have been on local brick and mortar management companies. What do you tell clients, and what do you tell yourself when you're investing? How much bearing does rental history actually have on what ability a property has to perform?
Well, first thing I'll say is anybody that gets to know me, and it doesn't take too long, is I am pretty blunt and pretty straightforward. I do not sugarcoat. I might live in East Tennessee, but anybody that listens to my accent knows I'm not from here. I am a damn Yankee, is what they call people down here like me. But I am very straightforward, and I do not pull punches. If you're looking for somebody to kind of hold your hand and make you feel good and pat you on the back and lead you along, I am not the agent for you. If you're looking for somebody that's going to be aggressive and go out there and get things done and make stuff happen and tell you how it is, then I'm the right guy for you. But and that's what I do. I tell, and to answer your question, it means nothing. It means absolutely zero. I don't care what that rental history is. It does not have any indication on how well you can do with that property. I look at the whole area and averages to know that an average property does X. And if the average property in that size has the ability to do $50,000, just using round numbers, then I know that property has at least the ability to do $50,000. The rest of it's all going to be management. So historic rents mean nothing at all.
I agree with that. I always say that it's not the property's fault, it's the management's fault, assuming it's a decent looking property. But 90% of the time, it's not because of the property that it underperforms.
Yeah, absolutely. Within reason. I mean, you're not going to take a shack and stick a sign up front and turn it into a short-term rental because you manage it really well. You still might make more than what the average person can if you're really good. But I mean, it's got to be a decent property. It's got to be clean. It's got to be nice. It's got to be, someplace where people would want to stay. And it doesn't always have to be specifically, again, I'm in the East Tennessee, so it's, the cabin concept. But I mean, my duplex is not a cabin. I've sold a couple of properties that are really not cabins, and they're still doing well. They're not going to perform at the absolute peak as a nice, big, beautiful cabin will. But with 12 million people a year come to the market, not everybody's looking for that. And you might be at a lower price point. You might be doing 2-bedroom property numbers with a 3-bedroom property, but you bought it at 2-bedroom numbers. So who cares? As long as the numbers work, it doesn't really matter.
Gotcha. I love that. So we know that rental history has no bearing on what makes a good deal. What does constitute a good deal in your opinion?
From a numbers perspective?
Yeah.
All right. Well, we have rules of thumb in real estate, right? Everybody talks about the 1% rule and all that kind of stuff. I guess a really simple rule that I look at is if I feel like the gross revenues for a year projection are 10%, at least 10% of what I'm buying the property for, then I know it's worth at least looking at. So if it's a $50,000 property or a $50,000 gross revenue property, the projections tell me that this property can do $50,000. Then if I can buy it for $500,000 or less, then I feel like, okay, this is a good property to at least look at. That's probably the most generic mindset. But I'm also, I'm not the most analytical guy in the world. I am a, ready, shoot, aim kind of person. So I look at very quickly at it. It's a cabin or it's a property in the Smokies. It's gonna rent well. I know it can do 50,000. I run some very, very, very quick numbers. I want to make sure I know what the HOA is. Taxes, for anybody that's not local to East Tennessee, taxes are ridiculously cheap here compared to most of the country. So you barely even notice your taxes when you're running your mortgage payments. But I look at gross revenue. If it's a 2-bedroom cabin, it can do $55,000 to $60,000. That's the average in the market. I assume 25% of that is going to go to my expenses, my cleaning fees, my utilities, just your regular operating expenses. And then I'll calculate what my mortgage payment's going to be based on the asking price. And then I start adjusting. When I look at my mortgage calc, I start adjusting up so I can get to that point where how high can I go and still get what I consider to be a good cash flow. Now, to me, what good cash flow is, bare minimum $1,000 a month. And when I say cash flow, I am not factoring in CapEx. I am not factoring in savings. I am not factoring in true maintenance. I'm looking at it. It's not what most people would consider a true cash flow number. I'm looking at my net operating income after my debt service. Again, I'm not taking those things into consideration because I know I'm going to put some aside for it. But I mean, the average long-term rental, people are happy with a couple $100s a door. So if I'm getting $1,000 and then I want to stick 30% of that over into CapEx and maintenance and all that stuff, I'm still at $700 a door. So I keep it very simple and very loose. I want a minimum of $1,000 after my basic operating expenses and my mortgage payment, and I'm good from there. Now, obviously, more is better, but that's my absolute bare minimum of what I'm looking for.
Awesome. So changing gears to your real estate agent, your sales business. So being a busy agent in a market, in a very hot market, probably the hottest one of our lifetimes, you see a lot of both off market and on MLS deals flying around. If a property is on the MLS, does that mean it is a bad deal or just less of a deal than one that's off market?
On market or off market has nothing to do with whether something's a deal or not. I tell people the asking price and none of that matters. It's a deal to you if the numbers work for you. So again, I'm looking for a minimum of $1,000 in a month in cash flow. I don't care if it's listed at $300. If I can get to $1,000 a month and pay $500, then that's still a deal to me. So the actual price doesn't matter. We don't see a lot of off-market stuff around here. I mean, the off-market stuff we see is really just a couple of agents that maybe got the listing or maybe got a lead on something, and you're getting maybe a day's notice. But in a market like this, man, it's hard to convince a seller to take an offer on something that when we hits the MLS is going to get 15 offers. So it's really hard to even wrap around that unless there's an agent being completely unethical and not letting the seller know how much money they could get. So frankly, if I have somebody coming to me, I'll tell them, I say, look, I can get you a deal closed quick if you want, but if you want to get the maximum value for it, we should put it on the MLS. And that's going against the investor mindset, but I'm looking out for what's best for that person. Now, somebody might not want to do that. They might say, I don't want to deal with all that. I don't want to deal with 10, 12 offers. If you can get me X number of dollars, then I'll take it for that. I mean, look, I got this cabin that I'm sitting in right now. And this guy knew this was not an inexperienced buyer. Actually, the guy I bought this from is a real estate agent that works in this market. But he had made a commitment to me in August to sell it at a set price, and he knew he could get more money for it. And he said, no, I'm going to keep my word and sell it to you. So it all comes down to relationships from that aspect of it. So the deal is a very relative term. It has nothing to do with asking price, selling price. It has to do if the numbers work for you. That's what makes it a deal.
Very well said. I love that. So as an agent, you work with a lot of different types of investors, newbies, experienced investors, but let's talk about new investors. So what is something that new investors get tripped up on a lot in your market or with short terms in general?
Analysis paralysis. The same thing everybody gets hung up with is it sounds too good to be true. And I get that because I was in that mindset for a long time. And it's really hard because you listen to all this other stuff out there. And, you know, when you start telling people that you have the ability conservatively to do 20, 25% net income, 20, 25% cash on cash return, that's very conservative. I mean, you know, prices are up in this market. I mean, it used to be 40%, 50%. Now I think 25 is pretty realistic for people to expect. It just doesn't sound realistic when they're used to hearing, oh, if you get 10 or 12% return, you're doing great. So I think that scares a lot of people. Just not knowing the market. A lot of people are still hung up on long distance investing. And that is definitely something to overcome. They think, well, I don't live there. This is going to be hard to do. Again, that's why you buy in a market where the infrastructure is there. One of my clients just posted an incredible testimonial on our Facebook page talking about that she found this handyman who has been just phenomenal for her and really has been her eyes and ears. And she lives like 3,000 miles away. And so it's getting people past that. That's probably the biggest thing. And it's mindset. It's just it's different. It's so different that you got to believe in it. You got to want to do it, and you got to just jump in and go for it. It's a competitive market. If you're sitting on your hands waiting for something to fall in your lap, you're going to be waiting a long time. So you've got to be aggressive. You got to go out there and make it happen.
Absolutely. So we've got about 3 more questions left before we wrap it up. But I want to do a quick, let's zoom in on your most recent deal, the duplex deal, because that is a very, very interesting deal to me, because a lot of people try to apply way too many real estate investing strategies to one property, but you actually were able to find the unicorn that fit, that was like 6 different real estate strategies in one. Can you tell us a little bit about everything, all of the molds that deal fits?
Well, let's see. First and foremost, motivated seller. It was absolutely. It was a very unique property, and it languished on the MLS for months and months and months. And I was wanting to buy a duplex. I wanted to move to Sevier County, and I wanted to house hack. It was just, I had listened to tons of podcasts. It just made sense. I wanted to get in that spectrum. So I was looking for a long time. And I saw this property on the MLS for a long time, but I had 2 things working against me. One, I had bought this primary residence in September of 2019, and lenders want you to live in that primary residence for about a year before you can buy another primary residence. So in May through August, I'm looking at stuff that's popping up on the MLS, but I'm kind of like, this looks like it could be a good deal, but it just doesn't make sense. So this one was sitting on the MLS, and what's crazy was they started out with it listed at, I believe it was almost $400,000. And it was way overpriced. Now, being a quarter of a mile from the main strip in Pigeon Forge, it's zoned commercial, so you had tons of flexibility in what you could do with it. But the original structure was built somewhere around the 50s. There's not even clear records of exactly when it was built. The second level was added sometime in the 70s. It had been a long-term rental. It was rough. It really needed a lot of work, but the location was just spectacular. So I'm just watching this thing, and I'm watching it, and I'm just expecting I'm going to lose this. I want to get in. So I finally reached out to my lender, and I'm like, look, I'm 11 months in this primary residence. Can I even look at buying another primary residence right now? And they were like, yeah, you're good. You're at 11 months. Go ahead and do it. So I believe it was listed, by the time I got around to it, I believe they had dropped the price all the way down to around 230, 240, somewhere in that range. And I came in and offered them 175. So I did everything to try to, it had been sitting forever. And we went back and forth. It took some negotiation back and forth. They had a net number that they wanted to get to, which was ultimately right around $200,000. And they owned it outright. So as we went back and forth, I wanted to try to get some of my closing costs covered. So I ended up buying it for $205 using conventional primary home financing. Now, because it was a duplex, I still had to put 15% down. And I honestly don't even remember what my interest rate was, somewhere around 3.25%, I think, somewhere in that range. So bought it as a primary residence investment duplex property. I then I knew going in what my plan was. I knew the location. I knew the downstairs was going to be an Airbnb, and I knew I was moving in upstairs. So I immediately moved into the apartment upstairs, which didn't need a ton of work, but I moved into that apartment, got with my contractor, and we started just ripping apart the downstairs. I ended up putting I think we're at about $75,000 is what I put into the downstairs. That includes furnishings and the whole 9 yards. And as soon as I had it done and ready, I put it up on Airbnb. It got finished. I had it ready to rent just before Christmas. I basically got the Christmas and New Year's crowd for the real peak. But I literally took in right at about $3,000 in revenue in basically 10 days between Christmas and New Year's. And so it's an investment house hack. It's an Airbnb. And if I really wanted to right now, I have not really thought about it or looked that hard into it, but I absolutely probably could refinance this thing right now with all the work I did downstairs and probably pull all that, most of, if not all of that 75 that I spent on it. I could probably get that back out of it right now if I wanted to. I just don't want to do that right now. I don't need to. So I'm going to leave it at my lower mortgage payment and let it sit like it is, because it's paying for all of my living expenses and then some.
That is amazing. That's a really great one. I'm glad you shared that one with us. So knowing what you know now and all the investments that you have, and having been so successful at scaling a portfolio in a very hot seller's market, what would be the advice that you would give your former self when you were first getting started?
That's tough, because I'm a big believer in that we are who we are today because of everything that we did in the past. So it's hard to say, yeah, I would have loved to have bought, I would have loved to have started buying these properties 3, 4, 5 years ago when I was first being introduced to the idea. But I'm not a big believer in looking back. I believe we learn from our past, but it doesn't change anything. I can't do that. We can learn from that. We can use lessons from that, but we're doing that so that we can do better today. I don't have a time machine. I can't go back in time. So honestly, I can't say I would change anything, because everything that I did before is what got me to where I am today. And I'm very happy with where I am today. So who cares? Who cares what it would have been? Woulda, coulda, shoulda, right? It doesn't matter.
That's great wording to segue into my next question is, what advice would you give a new investor that is not yourself?
Take action. Just go do it. Stop questioning, stop asking, find people, put yourself around people that are doing what you want to do, who have been there and done that. I mean, don't dive into something that you have no experience on, you have nobody leading you on, because you'll make a lot of mistakes. So surround yourself with people that are doing the things that you want to do, and then listen to them. I mean, there's so many lessons out there that, people will ask you to do things that you don't think make sense. If you found a good mentor, if you found somebody that's honest and ethical, they're going to give you the lessons, but you got to be willing to learn the way they want to teach. I mean, anybody who's old enough, or there's been 2 versions of it, but the Karate Kid movie, right? I mean, he had him painting a fence and waxing a car or whatever the heck it was. But he was teaching him how to prepare himself for the future. So get around people, listen to what they do what they tell you to do, listen to what they tell you to listen to, and absorb it. And then when you feel you got a little bit of confidence, you got to have a little bit of confidence, then just dive right in. Don't overanalyze it. Don't overthink it. If it works, and just go do it.
That's fantastic advice. And the last question, and I know you probably have quite a few recommendations because you read a lot of books. What is your favorite book?
So there's there's the easy ones. There's the Rich Dad, Poor Dad. There's the E-Myth. There's tons of them. There's tons of podcasts. The two books that had the biggest influence on me, first one was a book called The Big Leap by Gay Hedrick. This one hit me. I was in my 40s when I started kind of figuring this all out. And for me, so much of this had less to do with the investing and the numbers and the analytics of it, had to do with my mindset, just getting my head wrapped around that I deserve this, that I'm capable of doing this, that the only ceiling I have is my own. And The Big Leap hit me at just a point when I really needed to hear that. I really needed to understand, why was I languishing? Why was I taking so long? Why was I struggling? And that book helped me to overcome that. The other one was Extreme Ownership by Jocko Willink. And that's just wrapping your head around the concept of stop blaming anybody and everybody for whatever's happening in your life. You have zero control over that. Just take it, learn from it, absorb it, take it as your own, and move forward with it. And I'll give an honorable mention to anything written by Ryan Holiday, because and I know you're a huge fan of Ryan Holiday as well. His books and the stuff he talks about really helped me with my mindset and just getting past it. I used to be an incredibly angry person. I had a horrible temper. I struggled a lot with everything. I blamed everybody for everything. I mean, I went out there and worked hard and always got stuff done. I always achieved what I wanted to do, but I left a lot of weights in my past doing all of that, and kind of wrapping my head around taking ownership of everything and being calm and meditating and exercising and things that help keep your mind clear has had more to do with the change in my life than learning how financing works or learning how to structure a deal. It had way more to do with the mindset. So all those books have to do with mindset.
I agree. I love Ryan Holiday and the whole theme of Stoicism, because I am somebody who I'm a super anxious person, and being a real estate agent and doing a lot of deals, even if a buyer of mine has like one little thing that they weren't happy with, even if it's just like a piece of trim was messed up and they mention it to me, I will not sleep that night because I'm so worried that they're not happy overall with their deal. So reading a lot of his books really, really helped me out personally.
Yeah, anxiety and stress are things that we all deal with a lot. And that's the biggest thing, if you can overcome that. And in this environment with things moving so fast, I still suffer from it. I still, that's the one thing is with everything and that's why I listen to Ryan Holiday every day and I read Stoicism every day, because it's not something that you just read about and you learn it and you've got it. It's something that you practice every single day. We're all challenged with it every single day, and you can't let off of it. You've got to keep it front and center in your mind. I mean, I've got posts in my home, that talk about the 4 Stoic virtues, and it's just you need constant reminders of it. So yeah, you got to stay on top of it.
Exactly. Well, fantastic closing words, Derek. Thank you so much for coming on the show. If anybody wants to reach out to you about real estate investing, where can they find you?
Well, I'm probably most active on Facebook. You can look me up. It's just my name, Derek Tellier. Email derek@theshorttermshop.com. I mean, I'm easy to find there. I am on Instagram. I am not active on Instagram, but I'm on Instagram. I'm Running Biker Realtor is my tag on Instagram, and I started that when I was first getting into this, so I was trying to figure things out. But yeah, they can just reach out to me. Go to the Short-Term Shop or send me an email or find me on Facebook. I'm happy to chat about not just short-term rentals, mindset and overcoming it and doing it all in your 40s. I know there's a lot of people out there that are late in life trying to figure this out. If you just want to reach out to me and say, man, I'm 40 something years old and I'm trying to wrap my head around this, and you want to talk and you're not looking at short-term rentals or anything, I am happy to have a conversation about that, because I want to help people kind of get over those humps and figure out where they are.
Go giver mindset. I love it. Well, thank you so much. And we will talk to you soon, Derek.
Thank you, Avery. I appreciate you. Thanks.